Welcome back to Business 150, Introduction to Management. We are now looking at module number 5, which corresponds with content from chapter 5 of the textbook. In this module, we're looking at the topic of global business, global or international business. And that's, of course, what you see here on our very first title slide. So when we talk about the topic of global business in this class, I use the terms global business and international business pretty much interchangeably as synonyms. I don't see a great deal of distinction there. You may eventually run into some textbooks on this topic which try to make a very fine distinction between global business and international business. But for us, particularly in this class, we're going to look at them as exactly the same thing. And so we hope that after the end of this video, you will be able to define global business and at least take a look at some of the additional complexities that international activity brings to us as managers, which is really the topic of global business as it pertains to us. So, what is global business? And I think that the best way we can start this whole module out is by defining our terms. When I say global business, I want you to keep in mind that that phrase, global business, consists of one adjective and one noun. I thought this wasn't an English class. Well, sorry. What I mean by that is when I say global business, the noun is business and the adjective is global. What does that mean? That means that at the end of the day, whatever we're going to talk about in module number 5, we're still talking about business, conducting business, business for a profit, business so that your revenues are greater than your expenses, business so that you are trying to sell products or services to a consumer, or that you're trying to obtain necessary resources in your supply chain for the sake of making them products or services. One way or another, it's still business. Now, the reason I start this way is because, let's be honest, business is complicated. I mean, that's why you're taking this class, right? Because business is really complex. And so you have to consider things, if you're a manager, like how to manage human resources, how to lead them, how do you organize, how do you plan strategy, how do you execute well, how do you motivate your employees, how do you exercise the right amount of control, how do you communicate to teams, how do you work in an external environment that's always changing. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff in this class before we even talk about the adjective global. The business itself is complex, complicated, difficult, and challenging. Now, we already knew that before we hit module number 5, this module on global business. So, if we take that as the noun, business is the noun, then what does it mean when we modify it with the adjective global? What we really have done is added about 87 new layers of complexity onto an already complex task. We are now talking about buying and selling products and services with people who do not live in our country, who may not even speak our language as their native tongue, who may have significantly different beliefs about culture and society and government and how the world is supposed to work, right? In other words, it's business, but additionally complex and complicated because of the global adjective, the global dynamic. Once you start buying and selling stuff across your national borders with people who live in another country, you have just added several new layers of complexity. Now, the reason I start out this way is that we understand everything we're going to talk about in Module 5 within this context. In other words, another thing that you want to take away from this description of global business is that we are not looking to change some other country's society. We are not looking to get people who live halfway across the world to think more like us, to adopt our values, our convictions, our ethics, our beliefs. We are primarily conducting business. So this is not a political science class. This is not a sociology class. This is not a behavioral sciences class. This is not any of those kinds of things. This is a business class. And therefore, we are keeping our comments focused on how do we understand people who may not think the way we do? How do we understand the contours and the complications brought on by a global dynamic in business? primarily to operate in a private sector for-profit world with private sector for-profit objectives, purposes, and goals. All right? So that's really what we're talking about. We talk about global business, business that is made more complicated by the fact that we are now conducting it internationally. Now, for the sake of this particular textbook, it breaks it down into 4 main elements that we need to consider and that we'll begin to consider in the next lecture. But just at the outset, we want you to understand there are some things that make stuff complicated, and that you see here borrowed from figure 5.1 of your textbook, the global management environment. And you see the illustration there on the right-hand side. The point being that managers who are considering doing business internationally have to do research. You have to understand what the lay of the land is. You have to understand what a country's, and what I mean is that other country you're thinking of doing business in, what is their social cultural environment? What is their political legal environment? What is the economic environment there that may have very significant and direct impact upon your success doing business in that other country? And only after you do that research to understand what is the landscape, what is the environment in that country, can you choose the appropriate level of involvement and your operating strategy. Don't get the cart before the horse. Do your research first to figure out what is the appropriate way to start doing business in that other country. Like I said, we'll talk about this in the very next upcoming lecture, but this at least gives you a landscape for some of the things we're going to have to consider as we talk about business that's now more complex because of global activity. What are some examples of things that you need to be aware of? Well, if you were thinking of doing business in Venezuela, you have to be aware that Venezuela's inflation rate is something over 1 million %. I mean, it's just sort of staggering. It boggles the mind to even say that on this slide. What does that mean? It means you're dealing with people in a country who, when they go to the supermarket to buy groceries, let's say they're going to go buy milk and bread, there's no price tag in the supermarket. There's no price tag on the shelf. If you can find milk and bread on the shelf, you take it up to the cashier, and the cashier will do the calculation of what it costs this minute, which might be double what it cost 2 hours ago. That's how bad their inflation rate is. Prices skyrocketing. That will have some impact if you're trying to sell products or services in Venezuela. It'll have impact on you and how you can do business there, right? Or if you're trying to do business in Brazil or Russia, you have to realize in terms of their local currency, Brazil and Russia have 2 of the least stable currencies in the entire world right now. So the Brazilian real and the Russian ruble, there's no telling what's going to happen with exchange rates by the time you want to repatriate your profits back to your home country. This is a complexity that you will have to have professionals managing currency exchange rates to understand what is the best way to do business in those 2 countries. Not only that, consider any number of countries around the world who have a very high degree of political instability. And political instability has direct influence on how you do business there because it is the political regime which enforces the rule of law. And so, for instance, intellectual property law or trespassing or theft, all of these kinds of things, enforceability of contracts in the court system, all of these are directly influenced. The enforcement of the rule of law is directly influenced by the current political regime's stability or lack thereof. Or consider where we're at right now, right? Because of COVID-19, supply chains, what you previously thought was a durable, stable global supply chain, we're getting our stuff from China. We're having our machines built in China, now being strained or in some cases broken because of the impact of global pandemics. These are all just examples, and there are hundreds, if not thousands of more examples I could have put on the slide, of considerations and complexities because you are now doing business in a country outside of your own. These are some of the things you have to recognize. Just the added dynamic complexity and change you have to manage as a manager if your firm is going to embrace international business. So, short little video to get us started in Module 5, but I hope that you have gotten a working definition of global business and that you can at least identify some examples of the additional types of complexities that international brings to us as managers. I hope that's helpful. I'm really looking forward to this module and hope that you will get something out of it that will be useful to you, and we will see you in the next video.